Welcome back to the channel, guys. Today's video is going to be a ton of fun. I was just out here getting some yard work done, listening to a podcast, and all they talked about was copper, 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 copper. So we're going to talk about why copper bullets are kind of starting to take over for things like elk, bison, etc., etc. Stay tuned. Let's jump into it. So if you normally watch the channel, you notice I'm not sitting down over in my normal spot. That's because the Traeger and the baby monitor are going, so there would be a lot of background noise. Decided to just jump over here. I'll just roll some pictures up here and things like that of different copper bullets, my experience with them, etc., etc. If you guys watch the channel, you probably watched one of my last videos, which was the 165 CX out of my 300 Win Mag and how it performed on elk. Long story short, if you haven't seen the video, I'll link it right here. Go watch it. It performed really well. I took a pretty gnarly angle of a shot on that elk, and it performed really well. I'll put the video right here. It was very, very impressive. And that's really the short of it, is kind of why things like that are starting to take over for a lot of us hunting, you know, elk, bison, things like that. Like I said, not as much for deer, antelope. If you guys have a lot of experience hunting things like deer, elk, whatever, you know how kind of drastically different animals they are, both literally and in the sense of not shot placement, but you guys know what I mean. They're drastically different. You can hit a deer with, I don't want to say anything, but you guys will know what I mean. You have a lot more flexibility in terms of bullet construction, things like that, cartridge style, blah, 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 right? Versus elk. I know before some guy tells me he's killed 40 deer with his 243 and his 22-250, I get it. Of course you can, but I think you guys get what I'm saying. The other part of the reason, I think, is just kind of the natural ebbs and flows of how we as people do things, right? For a long time, people ran partitions, core locks, etc., etc., you know, kind of the old classic stuff, and then Akibons, and then there was some people running like burgers, right? Hornady came out with the ELDXs. You guys all know what that is, I'm sure, and this kind of long range mania kind of started being a thing. There was a lot of people kind of jumping on that bandwagon, and I think what kind of happens is people jump on that train. You get all geared up to go shoot 800-900 yards, 1,000 yards, whatever, and then you go hunting 5 years in a row and never shoot at anything over 300 yards, right? And I'm equally as guilty. If you guys watch the channel, I have a couple rifles that I like shooting a really long ways. Don't get me wrong, I love it just as much as the next guy. The difference, though, is in hunting scenarios, a lot of us aren't shooting past 400 or 500 yards, right? Even that's a really long shot for a lot of people. So I think what happens is, I'll use my two rifles here are a perfect example. Take my 300 Win Mag that I just was using, 165 grain CX at 3,223 feet per second. Cooking, super flat, super fast, out to 400 or 500 yards, plenty of energy, penetration, don't have to worry about a thing, right? Converse that with, say, my 6.5 Creed. Now, to be very straightforward, if I'm going to go shoot rocks, paper, whatever at 1,000 yards, my 6.5 Creed with the loadings that I shoot out of it, be it the ELDMs, the ELDXs, the whatever, drastically better in that scenario. The difference, though, with my 300 Win Mag, if I see a deer and elk at 350, 400 yards, I don't really need to dial. I know the drop's well enough to just put it on his back or hold a little bit high, squeeze one off, and it's going to get there, versus my Creed drops significantly more, which we don't need to have a debate of the ballistic coefficient and long range and whatever. I think you guys get what I'm saying. There's a reason that the hot, nasty speed and put it on his back to 400 yards was so popular for so long, and that's because that kind of covers the majority of shots that we end up with here in Western hunting. Now, of course, there's examples where you have to go above and beyond that. Sure, you could find a million of them on YouTube, whatever, but I think you understand what I'm saying. Most of us that are just regular dudes have our hunting rifle, and we go hunting once a year, once every few years, whatever. We're not really worried about taking those 700-800 yard shots. We're mainly shooting sub, say, 400 yards. And for that scenario, that 165 CX really makes pretty much anything in there not really a concern. It's super fast, super flat. It still has enough velocity and retained energy out to where I was hunting. I was at like 7,500 feet, so still a lot of, you know, kind of range there, if you will. I had everything I needed out to 800 yards to kill an animal. I'm not going to do that on an elk, right? But you have it if you need it. What am I getting at with all that, right, guys? The main point I'm getting at is, let's say we're on a deer hunt, okay? Boom, there's a buck, 400 yards. Situation's right where I feel comfortable taking that shot. Now, granted, yes, most of the time you're going to have time to look at your chart, look at the sticker on your gun, dial, do whatever, get a good range. You should always get a good range if you're going to shoot that far. But point being, with my 300 Win Mag, I can pull it up, range 400 yards, and I'm good, right? That's pretty much all I need to know. With my 6.5 Creed, and yes, you could memorize them, but I'm gonna have to pause for a second, just that little bit longer, look at, you know, my chart, dial, do whatever. Well, it's very accurate and I don't have a problem doing that. For the average guy who's probably not spending a ton of time at the range or out in the desert or wherever, like I live in Arizona, you're not out in the open sage flats or practicing long range significantly, you know, frequently throughout the year. Like anything, guys, repetition is going to make you more efficient. So if you're not doing it all the time, it's going to really slow you down. And for most people, that's not really what they want to do. Now, there's plenty of downsides to copper, right? One being, obviously, ballistic coefficient, right? If you guys have made it to this video, sorry about that. If you guys have made it to this video, I'm assuming that you kind of understand the main differences between copper, lead, etc., etc. If you want a really basic idea, there's a lot of other videos out there to walk you through that. That's not really my thing. Ballistic coefficient is kind of a thing, but the biggest aspect that makes BC not really mean anything is time of flight, right? So typically, your copper bullets are going to be a little bit lighter, okay? So they're going to go a little bit faster, right? That's why, obviously, the further you go, the more magnified wind drift and things like that with low BC are going to be, okay? Obviously, the high BC retains more velocity. There's plenty of arguments there. However, you would be surprised to look at, say, a 450 BC versus, say, a 650 BC, but one's going 3,200 feet a second and the other's going 2,600 feet a second. Say you take a 10-mile-an-hour crosswind at 400 yards, you would be amazed how close they actually are, to where in a hunting scenario, not really a factor, right? Now, again, if you go out to 700, 800, 900 yards, 1,000 yards, of course it's going to have a bigger play, right? But as a broad stroke, again, for most people shooting 300, 400 yards, not a concern. Next thing is, we talked about shot angle a little bit, we talked about speed, we talked about terminal effectiveness a little bit. That's what we're going to get into a little bit more right now. Terminal effectiveness. Now, before you guys freak out, it is an endless debate of what's better. Dumping energy, passing through 2 holes are better than 1. Dumping all the energy is better than it exiting out the back, blah, blah, blah. I hear both sides, I understand. Feel free to argue that down in the comments. I'm not here to debate that portion of it. What I will say is, with that 300 Win Mag setup, there's a lot of bullets I could have been shooting where I wouldn't have taken that shot. Say an SST, say any of your kind of cup and core, a 200 ELDX, they probably wouldn't have taken the shot, right? Which is what kind of led me to that particular loading on this particular hunt, was I knew I had the opportunity to very likely shoot very close, like inside 100 yards, which is exactly what happened. And I knew there was a small possibility I'd need to shoot, 455. I had one kind of opportunity that I was closing the distance at like 650. Wasn't going to shoot that far under the current scenario. Was working on closing the distance. Didn't work out, for a pretty funny story, actually. But in short, that load gets there fast enough, and in the right scenario where I might take a 600 yard shot or a 500 yard shot, I'm not going to take the shot if there's a ton of wind. Rather, I'm shooting the nastiest, highest BC load there is, or something like the 165 CX. If there's a ton of crosswind and unpredictable and whatever, I'm not taking the shot to begin with. So that doesn't really matter to me. When there's not a lot of wind, that time of flight is so minimal that doesn't really matter, right? So for me, being able to shoot 400 or 500 was important, but also having something I was supremely confident in, very, very close, was very important. Therefore, I landed on the 165 CX. It shot really well out of my rifle. It was really fast, and I wasn't really afraid of any shot angle, which gets me back to this original point. The shot I took, I probably played the clip earlier. If I haven't, I'll put it up right now. Went in just in front of the back hip and came out just behind the shoulder. So it went through all of this right here. All of it stopped on the back side of the shoulder right here, okay, on the hide. There's not a lot of cup and core type of bullets that are going to do that. Even some bonded bullets would struggle to make it that far, okay? Like, I don't know if a normal bond strike would have made it that far. I don't know if an AccuBond long range would have made it that far. A regular AccuBond, maybe. Federal's Terminal Ascent is a great bullet. That probably would have done it, right? But that really gives you the freedom of, again, us normal folks, draw a tag every now and again, and you go elk hunting. I don't have a lot of effective terminal effectiveness concerns when shooting a copper bullet versus something like a cup and core style lead bullet. It's going to be in my head a little bit more, whether it deserves to be or not. I think for a lot of us it just is. You just kind of have that fear. What if you have to punch through a shoulder at 50 yards, right? I'm not worried about it with the CX. I might be a little worried about that with the ELDX. Now I'm using the CX as an example a lot in this video just because I just had a hunt with it, but you could replace it with, say, LRX, E-tips, pick a copper bullet. You could kind of fill in the gaps of what I'm saying. And the other big benefit about them is I used to shoot a ton of AccuBonds, right? A ton of AccuBonds. It was all I ran for quite a while. But they're damn near double the money nowadays for the same style, right? 180 AccuBonds for my 300 Win Mag are crazy expensive compared to a box of this 165 Superformance Hornady stuff. You could make the argument of slightly higher quality of ammo, but again, I'm not shooting past 400 or 500 yards. It's shot very reasonable, extreme spreads, 20 FPS or so. Average, was sub 11, if I remember right. I don't have it right in front of me, but it wasn't anything that I was concerned about. It was fast. It's terminally effective. I mean, there's just not a reason for me to spend $80, $90 a box when I can spend $45 a box and be just as effective, if not a little bit more. That's kind of the other thing, right? You can buy these Barnes LRXs or these Hornady CXs or whatever for a lot less than you can buy a lot of the premium bonded type of bullets, say Nosler stuff. Even trophy bondeds are more expensive than the CX, at least last time I was looking for them. So, like I say, that's kind of a big part of it. Also, there's a lot of people online now that are just pushing this copper stuff. If you guys are watching this video, you probably watched the Vortex podcast. Ryan is all about the copper stuff, right? And you can kind of see why, rightfully so. It's very effective. Who else? Ron Spomer is all about it. He's really popular, A lot of those guys. Randy Newberg shoots a lot of E-tips and AccuBonds, things like that. But he's talked about copper bullets. Obviously, in some states they're mandatory. That's a different story. Again, guys, there's just not a lot of drawbacks to them for the average Western hunter. Now, if you're hunting in, say, really thick woods back east and you're shooting whitetails, it's not really, you can shoot them, sure. You don't really have the same, I guess I would say need to. You don't need to. If you're hunting over there, you can throw rocks at them most of the time and be fine, right? Just kind of joking around. But you get what I'm saying, right? You're not really shooting elk at anywhere from 40 to 400 yards when you're hunting in West Virginia. You know what I mean? So just to kind of recap, guys, like I said, a lot of publicity about them and how great they are. I know if you say anything positive, you're a fanboy, whatever, but a big reason I like the CX also is because it's in 4DOF, which I found to be really accurate if I do need to take those little bit longer shots. So there's a lot of publicity. They've also come a long ways recently, like the CX, the LRX, the things like that are very, very, I would say, a little bit more modernized and a little naughtier in a sense. You don't feel like you're sacrificing quite as much as some of the copper bullets of the past. So they've come a long ways. They get publicized really hard by a lot of big names. They're very effective. You can buy them for usually a lot less than your other comparable terminal offerings, like a Terminal Ascent, an AccuBond, something along those lines. They work. You get the flat trajectory of the speed plus not giving up that penetration and things like that, which again, for bigger animals, I tend to think is a little bit more important than something like a deer or an antelope, right? So I think that's that's kind of the main reasons why they've become so popular. You got all the publicity, the effectiveness, the affordability. I mean, they just check a lot of boxes for most of us normal folks that are going out hunting elk, you know, once every 3 or 4 years, maybe every couple of years, whatever the case may be. They just flat out work. But that's going to pretty much do it, guys. Make sure you subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.